Before the first lesson, a handbell could stop an entire hallway. Inside the classroom, chalk dust hung in the air, pencil shavings filled a metal crank sharpener, and rows of wooden desks faced a blackboard in mourning silence. To a child in the 1950s, it was ordinary. Today, much of it has vanished. But one item on this list, number 8, was once accepted discipline. Now, it could get a teacher fired. Many desks still had a small round hole in the upper corner, left there for an inkwell. A student using a fountain pen had to dip, write, and control the flow of ink without scratching the paper or leaving a blob on the page. Blotters sat nearby to dry fresh writing before it smeared. Fingers turned blue or black, cuffs picked up stains, and one careless movement could ruin a whole line of copywork. By the late 1950s, ballpoint pens were becoming cheaper and easier to trust. Disposable writing tools slowly made the inkwell unnecessary. But the bigger change was this. Handwriting was not just writing. It was judged like conduct. Across the room, children bent over lined paper, filling row after row with loops, slants, and careful cursive letters. The teacher watched for more than spelling. She checked posture, pencil grip, spacing, and whether every letter leaned at the proper angle. Many classrooms still followed Palmer-style penmanship, where handwriting was a daily drill and discipline. A perfect page could earn real pride, because neat writing showed patience, control, and attention to instruction. That place at the center of school life did not last. Typing classes, computers, and new curriculum standards pushed penmanship aside. Soon, another classroom tool would take over the wall and turn the entire world into a lesson. The teacher reached above the chalkboard, grabbed a metal ring, and tugged down a canvas map that snapped, rolled, and wobbled before settling into place. For a moment, the whole classroom watched the world unroll from the ceiling. Geography became a physical performance. A student stood at the front with a wooden pointer, tracing the Mississippi River, tapping the Great Lakes, or finding a country that seemed impossibly far away. Globes sat nearby for another view, while memorized capitals and borders filled the lesson. Projectors, smartboards, and online maps eventually replaced the pull-down maps place on the wall. The next vanished classroom object was smaller, but its smell stayed in people's memories for life. Before photocopiers, a stack of worksheets often arrived warm and slightly damp from the mimeograph machine. The letters were purple, sometimes sharp, sometimes fuzzy, and the paper curled at the edges as the teacher passed it down the rows. Every student knew the smell. It was a sweet chemical ink scent that rose from the page before the lesson even began. A hurried teacher might leave smudges in the margins, and students could finish class with purple stains on their fingertips. Photocopiers, laser printers, and digital assignments eventually made the mimeograph disappear. But for many former students, that ink smell still brings back another classroom texture waiting in the air. Chalk dust. Chalk dust was part of the school day. The teacher's chalk squeaked across a blackboard, left white powder on the ledge, and covered sleeves by lunchtime. That board was the classroom's main screen, worksheet, and presentation tool at once. Spelling words, arithmetic problems, maps, sentence diagrams, and homework directions all appeared there, one line at a time. Then came eraser duty. A student was chosen to take the felt erasers outside and clap them together, sending pale clouds into the air before bringing them back for the next lesson. Whiteboards, dry erase markers, projectors, and smartboards slowly replaced the chalkboard. But some vanished classroom routines were not just tools. They were daily rituals. Each morning, many 1950s students stood beside their desks, placed a hand over their heart, and faced the American flag at the front of the room. The Pledge of Allegiance was more than a classroom habit during the Cold War. Schools treated patriotism as part of civic training, and in 1954, the words "under God" were added, linking the ritual even more closely to national identity. Today, the pledge still happens in some schools, but it is more varied, more debated, and legally voluntary for students. After that formal start, the day moved toward another childhood status symbol: what a student carried to lunch. Lunch came in with a clank. A 1950s classroom often had a row of metal lunch boxes, each with a glass-lined thermos tucked inside, carrying milk, soup, or cocoa. Inside were wax paper sandwiches, an apple or orange, and maybe homemade cookies wrapped from the kitchen that morning. The outside mattered just as much. Cowboys, rockets, television heroes, and cartoon characters turned a lunchbox into a badge of what a child loved. Metal lunchboxes faded as plastic became cheaper. Cafeterias expanded. Glass thermoses raised safety concerns, and packaged foods changed lunch habits. But the next classroom item takes us away from childhood pride and into something much stricter. On some classroom walls, Discipline was not just a rule, it was an object. A wooden paddle might hang near the teacher's desk, visible enough for every student to understand what it meant. In many 1950 schools, corporal punishment was legal, accepted, and sometimes written into policy. Some teachers rarely touched the paddle. Others used it for talking back, fighting, or repeated disruption. Experiences varied by state, town, and classroom, but the threat alone could shape behavior. It faded as child psychology changed. Parents challenged school authority, lawsuits became a concern, and districts rewrote discipline rules. Once fear left the wall, classrooms still needed order, but it came from quieter tools. Order could be built into the furniture. In many 1950s classrooms, heavy wooden desks sat in straight rows, all facing the teacher's desk and the blackboard. Some were bolted down, and even when they were not, the message was clear: eyes forward, hands visible, attention in one direction. A seating chart made that order easier to enforce. Teachers could spot an empty seat during roll call, separate talkative friends, and call on students for recitation without guessing names. Today, many classrooms use group tables, reading corners, flexible chairs, and activity centers built for movement and collaboration. But in those perfect rows, even speaking often followed a stricter script. A teacher could turn a quiet room electric by saying one name. The student stood beside the desk and recited the sevens table, spelled necessary, or read a paragraph from the class reader while everyone listened. For some children, it was a small triumph. For others, it meant a red face, a shaky voice, and the fear of losing their place before the whole class. Poems, Bible verses in some schools, and patriotic passages were often learned by repetition and performed aloud. Modern classrooms still value speaking, but they lean more toward discussion, reading groups, and support for different learning speeds. Back then, performance happened in public. Next came the supplies that made every desk feel like a miniature workshop. Every row of desks depended on the crank sharpener mounted near the door. A student raised a hand, asked permission, carried the pencil across the room, and turned the handle while the classroom filled with that rough grinding sound and the smell of fresh cedar shavings. When the point was sharp, there was one more duty: slide out the little metal tray and empty the curls and graphite dust into the wastebasket without spilling them. That small ritual faded as mechanical pencils, electric sharpeners, classroom supply bins, and digital work made pencil points less important. But on the teacher's desk sat an object that mattered even more: the gradebook. The gradebook was the teacher's private ledger. Its ruled pages held attendance marks, quiz scores, conduct notes, and final averages, often written in careful columns with a red fountain pen or sharpened pencil. Students did not open an online portal after supper to see what changed. They waited for a test to be handed back or for a report card to travel home after weeks of silence. That little book gave grades a kind of mystery. Parents were not alerted by instant messages, and classmates could not refresh a screen for updates. Today, records are faster, clearer, and harder to lose. But when the old classroom vanished, it left one question behind: what did we gain and what did we give up? Those rooms taught more than reading and arithmetic. They taught patience in waiting, routine in lining up, respect at the teacher's desk, fear of punishment, pride in neat work, and resilience when the day was hard. Not everything old was better, but the chalk dust, desks, bells, and books still carry meaning for those who lived it. Thank you for watching. Write a comment with the classroom object you remember most, and subscribe for more nostalgic history.